Before we dive into today's story, if this is your first time watching one of our videos, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us till the very end. And if this story moves you, share your thoughts in the comments and send it to a friend who needs to hear it. Now, let's begin. The Crystal Veranda was the kind of restaurant people whispered about, the kind that required reservations made months in advance and enforced a dress code that silently judged you the moment you walked through the glass doors. Sunlight poured in through towering floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off polished marble floors and expensive glassware, bathing the room in golden light that made every table feel like a stage. Well-dressed guests laughed softly over designer cocktails and artfully arranged meals that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. At the large corner table, positioned so everyone in the restaurant could see it, 30 people gathered to celebrate Evelyn Harper's 60th birthday. Friends, relatives, co-workers, distant cousins, and longtime acquaintances filled every seat, their voices blending into a steady hum of polite laughter and curated conversation. At the far end of the table sat Dr. Renee Harper, dressed simply in a white blouse and navy slacks, sipping sparkling water while nearly everyone else raised flutes of champagne and mimosas. Renee watched the room, quietly, used to observing rather than being observed, her posture calm, but her expression guarded. This was her family's world. Appearances, performance, and quiet competition disguised as love. She already knew how the afternoon would go. Compliments would be wrapped in criticism, concern would be delivered as judgment, and her life would once again be measured by standards she had never agreed to follow. Still, she came because it was her mother's birthday and because some small part of her still hoped that this time might be different. At the center of the table sat Clara Monroe, Renee's older sister, glowing in a designer dress that probably cost more than Renee's monthly mortgage payment. Clara leaned in close to their mother, commanding attention with practiced ease, laughing loudly and gesturing dramatically as if the entire room were her audience. Beside her sat her husband, Ethan Monroe, impeccably dressed, every inch the successful corporate attorney, nodding along with a look of quiet superiority. Across from Renee sat her younger brother, Daniel Harper, with his pregnant wife Lydia, both smiling constantly, their hands resting protectively over Lydia's growing belly as if to make sure everyone noticed. Their father, Thomas Harper, presided from his seat near Evelyn, surveying his family with the pride of a man who believed he had built the perfect picture of success. And then there was Renee, the unmarried daughter, the overachiever, the woman they loved to pity. "Renee looks exhausted," Aunt Marjorie said loudly, her voice carrying easily down the table. "Are you sleeping at all, sweetheart? You look worn out." Renee offered a polite smile. "I'm fine, just busy." Clara smirked. "She's always busy. Renee is married to her job." Laughter followed. Thomas shook his head. "A career is fine, Renee, but it shouldn't be everything. Look at Clara. She has a successful career and still made time for a family." Clara placed a hand over her heart. "It's about priorities." Renee said nothing, stirring her water slowly, already feeling the familiar weight settle on her chest. Daniel leaned forward, trying to sound helpful but failing. 70-hour work weeks, coming home to an empty house. That can't be healthy. "It's not empty," Renee said quietly. "I have a cat." The table burst into laughter. Even Evelyn covered her mouth, trying not to smile. "A cat?" Uncle Frank repeated. "Well, at least it's something." "But it's not a husband," Aunt Marjorie added. "Or children." "Renee, you're 34, Clara said, tilting her head with fake concern. "Your biological clock is ticking. You can't ignore that forever." Ethan nodded. "You haven't brought a date to a family event in years. That says something." "It says I value my privacy," Renee replied. Clara leaned forward, her voice rising just enough for nearby tables to hear. "My sister is beautiful, successful, and completely alone. It breaks my heart." It breaks mine too, Evelyn said softly, squeezing Renee's hand. There's still time, sweetheart. You just have to make it a priority. Clara smiled smugly. I was married at 31. First baby at 33. Second at 35. And now, she placed a hand on her stomach. Another on the way. Gasps and congratulations rippled around the table. Renee smiled politely. Congratulations. But inside, she felt the familiar sting. Not of jealousy, but of being reduced once again to what she supposedly lacked. Aunt Marjorie shook her head sadly. What good is success if you have no one to share it with? Clara's voice sharpened. At this rate, Renee, you'll die alone with nothing but awards on your wall. The table went quiet. Every eye turned to Renee. Thomas sighed heavily. You had so much potential, but you focused on work instead of building a real life. Renee checked her watch. 12:47 p.m. Perfect. I have built a life, she said calmly. You just don't know it. Clara frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Renee met her sister's eyes steadily. It means you've all made assumptions about me without ever asking real questions. We ask, Evelyn protested. You ask if I'm dating, Renee said. You never ask about my work, my goals, my life. Do any of you even know what kind of doctor I am? Silence. I'm chief of pediatric surgery at Westbridge Children's Hospital, Renee continued. I lead a team of 48 specialists. I developed a surgical technique now used worldwide. I've saved hundreds of children's lives. The table stared at her. But none of you know that, she said, because you never cared to ask. Clara scoffed. That's impressive, but you're still single. Renee smiled faintly. Am I? At that moment, the restaurant doors opened. Renee's timing was flawless. Her phone had buzzed 5 minutes earlier. The front doors swung open, and a tall man walked in first, confident and unmistakable, carrying a little girl on his hip while holding a young boy's hand. Behind him followed a woman carrying a baby in a carrier. The man's presence drew attention instantly. Dr. Julian Reed, one of the country's most respected pediatric neurosurgeons, moved with calm authority and warm familiarity. His face had appeared on medical journal covers, but the way he smiled now, soft, genuine, was not for cameras. The little girl squealed, "Mommy!" and wriggled free, running toward Renee. Renee stood just as her daughter crashed into her legs. "Hi, sweetheart," Renee laughed, lifting her. Julian leaned in and kissed Renee naturally, comfortably, unmistakably her husband. "Sorry we're late," he said. "The aquarium was chaos." The boy hugged Renee's waist. "Mom, can we get a shark?" The baby fussed gently as the nanny stepped closer. 30 people stared in stunned silence. Renee turned calmly to her frozen family. "Everyone," she said, her voice steady. "This is my husband, Dr. Julian Reed, and these are our children." The world her family thought they knew shattered in a single breath. For a long moment, no one spoke. The entire crystal veranda seemed to pause with them, nearby diners pretending not to stare while clearly listening. Evelyn Harper's champagne flute trembled in her hand. Thomas Harper looked as though the air had been knocked out of him. Clara's mouth opened, then closed, as if her brain had stopped supplying words. Daniel leaned back in his chair, eyes wide. "You're married?" Clara finally whispered. "With children?" Renee nodded gently, shifting her daughter on her hip. "Yes, married for 6 years. 3 kids, and a nanny because 2 surgeons and 3 kids is not a sustainable math problem." Julian chuckled softly at that. "We tried without help. We almost lost our minds." The little boy tugged Renee's sleeve. "Mom, I'm hungry." "I know, sweetheart. We'll get food in a minute." Evelyn finally found her voice. "Renee, why didn't you tell us?" Renee's expression softened, but her voice stayed steady. Because every time we talked, you asked if I was dating. Not if I was happy. Not how my life was going. You decided who I was without ever asking me. Julian placed a hand on her back, grounding her. Renee didn't hide. She just stopped correcting assumptions. The words landed heavy. No one argued. Clara shook her head in disbelief. So all this time we thought you were alone. You never asked anything that would have led to a different answer, Renee replied. Thomas stood slowly. 6 years. 6 years of grandchildren I didn't know existed. His voice cracked. That's on me. Evelyn covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. I missed everything. Renee stepped closer, careful not to wake the baby. You missed it because you were looking for the daughter you wanted, not the woman I became. Julian added gently, we would have welcomed you at any time. The manager approached, recognizing Renee. Dr. Dr. Reed, would you like your usual family table prepared? Thomas blinked. Usual. Julian smiled. We eat here often between hospitals. That only deepened the shock. The family followed as the staff quickly rearranged tables for the children. Renee's daughter climbed onto a chair, swinging her legs. Grandma, she asked shyly, looking at Evelyn. Evelyn froze, then rushed forward and hugged her, sobbing openly. Yes, baby. Grandma. That single word broke something open in the family that years of polite dinners never had. As food arrived, real questions finally came. Not about dating, not about clocks or expectations, about Renee's surgeries, about Julian's research, about the kids' school and favorite cartoons. Thomas listened as Renee explained her latest breakthrough. Daniel asked thoughtful questions. Even Clara, humbled, admitted quietly, I thought I had everything figured out. I was wrong. Renee didn't gloat. She simply nodded. Life doesn't fit into the boxes we build. Julian told stories about their early marriage, about missed holidays, about falling asleep over medical charts, about celebrating anniversaries in hospital cafeterias. The children added their own dramatic versions. Laughter replaced tension. The family saw not just success, but real life, messy, demanding living. At one point, Thomas watched Julian tie Renee's daughter's shoe without being asked. He leaned toward Renee and whispered, he's a good man. Renee smiled. He is. That was all she needed to say. When lunch finally wound down, the family stood outside together in the sunlight. Evelyn held the baby like she was afraid to let go. Thomas cleared his throat. Renee, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you effort. Renee looked him in the eyes. Then show it, not with speeches, with presence. Clara stepped forward, her voice quieter than Renee had ever heard it. I'm sorry. I thought success looked one way. You built something real. I see that now. Renee accepted the words without bitterness. We can start over. The kids waved, already climbing into the family minivan. Julian squeezed Renee's hand. That went better than I expected. Renee exhaled slowly. Me too. Even if it doesn't last, today mattered. Julian smiled. Our kids met their grandparents. That's a win. Renee nodded. That's enough. That night, after the house grew quiet and the children slept, Renee sat beside Julian, scrolling through photos from the day. Her mother holding the baby, her father laughing with the twins, her sister standing awkwardly but trying. 7 years of assumptions undone in one afternoon. Julian kissed her temple. You did good today. Renee leaned into him. I didn't do it for them. I did it for us. For our kids. They deserve to be seen. So do I. Julian smiled softly. You've always been seen by the people who matter. Renee looked down the hallway toward her children's rooms, toward the life she had built with intention, sacrifice, and love. Whatever her family chose to do next, she already had everything she needed. And for the first time, she wasn't asking for acceptance. She was offering opportunity. Opportunity to know her. The real her. And this time, if they chose not to take it, she would still be whole. The next morning, Renee stood in her kitchen in scrubs, coffee growing cold on the counter, while Julian packed school lunches with the efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. The twins argued over whose turn it was to pick the cereal. The baby gurgled in her bouncer, kicking her feet like she was conducting an orchestra. It was loud. It was chaotic. It was perfect. Renee's phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. "Can I come by this weekend? I want to see the kids again. I brought baby clothes I never got to give you." Renee stared at the message longer than she expected to. For years, her parents had only asked about work. Now they were asking about life. She showed the phone to Julian. He raised his eyebrows. "That's new." Renee nodded slowly. "It is." She typed back. "Yes. Saturday afternoon. Come early if you want to see soccer practice." Julian smiled. "You're really doing this?" "I am," Renee said. "Not because they deserve unlimited chances, but because our kids deserve grandparents who show up." Julian leaned in and kissed her forehead. "That's leadership, Dr. Reed." Renee smirked. "I run a surgical department. I can handle a family." Saturday came, and so did her parents, awkward, overbearing, carrying too many gifts but present. Thomas tried too hard. Evelyn cried too easily. But they stayed. They watched the twins kick a soccer ball in the yard. They held the baby while Renee cooked dinner. They asked real questions about schedules, about bedtime routines, about how Renee balanced everything. For the first time, Renee saw something different in her father's eyes. Not disappointment, respect. "I was wrong about you," Thomas admitted quietly while helping Julian wash dishes. "You didn't choose work over life. You built both." Julian nodded. "She builds what she believes in." In the living room, Evelyn rocked the baby gently. "I wish I had known you like this sooner," she whispered to Renee. Renee didn't soften the truth. "You could have, but you're here now." That was the boundary. That was the grace. No pretending the past didn't exist. No punishing forever either. Just a clear line between what was and what could be. That night, after everyone left and the house settled into its familiar quiet, Renee stood at her bedroom door watching Julian tuck the twins into bed. She listened to the baby breathing softly down the hall. She felt the deep, steady tiredness that came from a life fully lived, not imagined. Her family might never fully understand her choices. They might still slip back into old patterns. But Renee no longer needed their approval to validate her life. She had built something extraordinary, not just in operating rooms, but in bedtime stories, scraped knees, shared meals, and late-night talks with a partner who saw her completely. Julian joined her at the doorway and wrapped an arm around her. "You okay?" he asked. Renee smiled. "More than okay." She leaned into him. "For years, they defined me by what I wasn't. Today, I finally let them see who I am." Julian kissed the top of her head. "And if they forget?" Renee looked at her children's doors, then back at him. "Then we remind ourselves. This is our life. This is our success." And with that, Renee turned off the hallway light, walking back into the life she had chosen, not to prove anything, but because it was exactly the life she wanted. 2 months later, the small stone church was filled with soft light, the kind that made everything feel calmer, more forgiving. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the wooden pews in warm colors as family members and close friends gathered for baby Islah's christening. Renee stood near the front in a simple blue dress, holding her youngest, while Julian stood beside her with the twins fidgeting quietly, dressed in matching outfits and trying very hard to behave. Renee's parents sat in the front row this time, not as distant observers, but as present grandparents holding programs and whispering excitedly about how much the baby had grown. Clara sat a few rows back, her expression softer than Renee remembered from childhood, watching the children with something close to admiration instead of comparison. When the priest asked the family to come forward, Thomas stood first, walking with quiet pride, his hand resting on Evelyn's back as if grounding both of them. As water touched Isla's forehead, Evelyn whispered a shaky prayer of gratitude, not just for the child, but for the second chance she had been given to know her daughter's real life. Renee felt something inside her loosen, not erased, but healed enough to breathe. Later, as the church emptied and laughter filled the courtyard, Renee watched her children run across the grass while Julian talked with her father about fishing and soccer schedules, normal conversations that once felt impossible. Evelyn held Isla, rocking gently, humming a tune Renee remembered from childhood. For the first time, Renee saw her family not as judges, but as imperfect people trying, late, clumsy, but trying. Julian slipped his hand into Renee's. "Looks like they're learning," he said softly. Renee nodded. "So am I." She wasn't learning how to please them. She was learning how to allow connection without losing herself, how to offer access without surrendering boundaries, how to love without shrinking. As her children laughed and her husband smiled at her with that same steady certainty, Renee knew this was the real ending. Not perfect reconciliation, not dramatic apologies, but something stronger. A life already full, now with room for more. Not because she needed it, but because she chose it. And that choice, freely made, was the greatest success she would ever have. Spring arrived quietly, the kind that didn't announce itself with grand gestures, but instead crept in through open windows and warmer mornings. Renee noticed it in small ways, in the way the twins no longer needed jackets for school, and how Isla slept with her tiny fists open instead of clenched, and how Julian left early morning jogs feeling lighter instead of weighed down. Her parents began calling more often, not just to ask about work. They asked about homework, about soccer games, about whether Isla was teething. At first, Renee had been cautious, waiting for the old patterns to return. But slowly, consistently, her parents showed up. They attended a school play. They brought over soup when Julian had a late surgery. They babysat, nervously at first, then with growing confidence. Renee watched it all with guarded hope. She didn't rewrite history in her mind. She didn't pretend the hurt never happened, but she allowed space for something new to grow. Healing, she realized, wasn't loud. It was built quietly in repeated actions, in showing up when it was inconvenient, in listening instead of correcting. That kind of healing felt unfamiliar, but real. Clara changed too, though in more subtle ways. The competitiveness softened. The constant comparisons faded. One afternoon, Clara called Renee and, for the first time, didn't talk about milestones or achievements. She talked about fear, about the pressure she felt to be perfect, about how watching Renee manage both career and family with confidence made her realize how much of her own life had been driven by approval. "I thought you were running away from responsibility," Clara admitted, "but you were just building something different." Renee listened without judgment. "Different doesn't mean wrong," she said gently. That conversation didn't fix everything, but it shifted something important. The sisters were no longer measuring themselves against each other. They were finally seeing each other as two women navigating impossible expectations in different ways. It wasn't closeness yet, but it was respect. And for Renee, that was a meaningful step forward. At the hospital, Renee continued to lead with the same focus and intensity, but something had changed there too. She stopped overworking to prove herself. She left on time more often. She attended school events without guilt. She laughed more in the break room. Her residents noticed. "You seem lighter," one of them said. Renee smiled. "I finally stopped carrying other people's definitions of success." Julian noticed it most at home. Their evenings felt calmer, their conversations deeper. They weren't just surviving their lives anymore, they were living them. They planned a family trip for the summer. Nothing extravagant, just a beach, sandcastles, and no pagers for a few days. The idea once would have felt impossible. Now it felt necessary. Renee had spent years proving she could do everything. Now she was learning that she didn't have to do everything alone, and she didn't have to sacrifice joy to be excellent. One quiet evening, Renee sat on the porch while her children played in the yard and Julian grilled dinner. Her parents were inside, helping with dishes. Laughter drifted through the open windows. It wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was real. Renee rested her hand over her heart, feeling a deep, steady peace she had earned. Not given, earned through hard choices, resilience, and the courage to live a life that didn't fit anyone else's script. She watched her children run, her husband smile, her family try, and she realized something simple and powerful. Her life no longer needed a dramatic reveal, a defense, or a justification. It spoke for itself, in love, in purpose, in the quiet confidence of a woman who knew exactly who she was. And that, Renee knew, was the truest ending of all. Like and subscribe to my channel for more contents like this, and let us know where you are watching from under the comment section.